What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. This weekend, the UFC is in Chicago for a really legit card. We got UFC 319 headlined by Dricus Du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev, two of the best middleweights going at it for the championship. 5 rounds this weekend, so pretty excited for that. Without further ado, you already know what it is. We're jumping right into the picks and predictions for every single fight on this card. We've been absolutely killing it this year, so, stay tuned in, hit the like button, and let's jump right into the picks and predictions for UFC 319. Kicking off the card, we got a sketchy one to begin with. We got Karine Silva versus Dione Barbosa. Karine Silva originally was supposed to fight JJ Aldridge on this card. She was an absolute lock to beat JJ Aldridge, but ends up fighting Dione Barbosa instead. Definitely a trickier opponent. Dione Barbosa, great on the ground. I think on the feet, Karine Silva has a slight advantage here. And overall, I think that, if Karine Silva just kind of brings the pressure, brings the pace, brings the offensive wrestling to Dione Barbosa, she will find success. Overall, she's a more experienced fighter, 18-5. Dione Barbosa being 8-3, so, still pretty young in her MMA career. She's coming off that win to Diana Belbita, who she subbed, by arm triangle. Pretty cool submission, but at the end of the day, Diana Belbita, not high-level competition. Karine Silva, on the other hand, coming off that loss to Viviane Araújo, who is high-level competition. So, Karine Silva was a minus 300 going into that Viviane Araújo fight. People were a lot higher on her than she was. Ended up, getting taken down, getting held down for quite a bit in that matchup. Now against Dione Barbosa, like I said, I think she has to be one step ahead. She has to bring the wrestling to Dione Barbosa, mix it up, stay kind of quick on the feet, throw a bunch of volume. And I think that if she does have the tools to get this one done. She is a pretty moderate favorite going into this, about minus 205. Not sure if that's worth playing just yet. I haven't played it. Like I said, she was a lock to be JJ Aldridge, but another thing going for her in this matchup is the fact that Dione Barbosa is a short notice opponent. Barbosa is not coming in here with the full camp, so I think Silva has the tools to get it done. I think that, the short notice for Barbosa should give Silva a slight edge. I can kind of understand the odds, but I still think it's a little bit chalky. But Karine Silva will have to be the pick. I think she gets this one done on the scorecards. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got Nursulton Ruziboev versus Bryan Battle. And I'm going to go with Nursulton Ruziboev here, and that's not, any slight on Bryan Battle just because he had a boring fight last time out. I actually bet on him against Randy Brown. I thought he did do just enough to win that. I know some people were saying that Bryan Battle did rob Randy Brown in that fight, but I think Bryan Battle did just enough to get the win there. And, Bryan Battle's made me a shit ton of money. I bet on him pretty heavily against Kevin Jousset as well. He had a great performance against Kevin Jousset. Now coming into this Ruziboev fight, I think that, Bryan Battle is good, but at range, in the striking distance, I think Ruziboev is quick. His movement is really good. I see him kind of doing more in the striking against Battle here. And I think Battle, obviously on the ground, does have great jiu-jitsu, but I don't see him taking Ruziboev down consistently. I think that Battle will have a similar fight, kind of like his last one against Randy Brown, just kind of pushing Ruziboev up against the fence. Ruziboev is going to have the urgency to get off the fence while he is being held there. And Battle does have really good fight IQ, like you saw in his last fight. He will do kind of what he needs to do to win. But I think overall, Ruziboev is durable. Battle's also durable. I see this one going all the way. I think the round line is actually pretty good to bet on. Over 2.5 is pick'em at this time, minus 110. I think it was plus 100 even just yesterday. So over 2.5, I think is kind of solid to look at here, just because I think both these guys are tough. And while they both can, get finishes, I think in this matchup, we're going to see Battle try to slow the pace down. Ruziboev kind of working off of that, and Battle, being pretty legit when it comes to his durability. So I think Ruziboev is just going to slightly edge this one out. I'm going to go with the underdog here. I think that, Ruziboev will be doing all the damage. Battle's going to play, defense with his offense by holding up against the fence, but I don't really like picking that kind of side. I think Ruziboev stays upright. I think he gets off the fence. I think he does work in space, and then, Battle works him back in. So I'm going to go with Ruziboev just slightly here. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Edson Barbosa versus Drakkar Klose. And, Edson Barbosa, he's going to come in this matchup about, almost 40 years old, off a long layoff, fought over a year ago. His last fight was against Lerone Murphy, where, he did kind of get dominated in that fight. And then Drakkar Klose, obviously coming off that quick finish loss to Joel Alvarez. And, Edson Barbosa in this matchup, I think he's still going to have the power. I think he's still going to have the dynamic attacks. Obviously, maybe the speed goes down a little bit, but this fight is also up at lightweight. So, Barbosa coming up 10 pounds. I think that says a lot about, potentially his conditioning at his current age of 40 years old. And I think that Drakkar Klose will want to, bully and wrestle and get Barbosa to the ground a lot in this fight. But I think that, this is a pretty interesting matchup because Barbosa's takedown defense is strong. I think even Lerone Murphy, Murphy did get some takedowns on him, but that was after, it was a hurt, really damaged Barbosa. When Barbosa was fresh, Murphy was not able to take Edson Barbosa down. And obviously Murphy is well-rounded, but he's not, the best just all-out wrestler. But I think Drakkar Klose here will struggle to get Edson Barbosa to the ground. I think that if that's his only path, because I think that even a slower, older 40-year-old Edson Barbosa is still dynamic enough and, much better than a Drakkar Klose, who's also not young himself. Drakkar Klose, 37, going into this matchup. So it's not like Drakkar Klose is this young, surging prospect. And I think that Drakkar Klose in this fight, if he doesn't get the takedowns, he will see a lot of different looks on the feet that I don't think that he has the skills to handle. So it's going to be hard picking at 40-year-old Edson Barbosa. I think that there's obviously a bunch of things to look out for there, but I see him getting it done. I think this is, like a budget version of like a pure throwback Jose Aldo performance where he defends a ton of takedowns in space, just pieces up his opponent. I'm going to go with Edson Barbosa here. I think he gets one done by decision. Maybe he does find a knockout, but I see this one going all the way. Not sure if he still has the speed, still has the power to, just kind of be putting people away. So I'm going to go Edson Barbosa by decision. Let's move on to the next matchup. All right, next up, we got Alexander Hernandez versus Chase Hooper. And this is the first fight on this card that I have a fairly confident prediction in. The 3 fights leading up to this with the Karine, Silva, Ruziboev, and Edson Barbosa, I think all those picks can be pretty sketchy, can go either way. But if I had to lean, those are the sides I'm leaning. For this Alexander Hernandez versus Chase Hooper matchup, I think it's pretty clear cut. I'm going with Chase Hooper here. I think Chase Hooper is getting really good. He's obviously levels above Alexander Hernandez on the ground. I think on the feet, obviously, Chase Hooper, the similar criticism he always gets is the fact that his striking defense is pretty poor. He can be hit, but, he's going to have a slight reach advantage. He's going to be much taller than Alexander Hernandez here. And I think that Hernandez, is going to struggle. He is a dog, and Hernandez is tough, but I think that Hooper is going to show levels here. I think he's improving in the striking quickly. He's obviously improving a lot on the ground as well. I think that he's definitely worth his price. He was worth his price a lot, earlier on this week. He's getting wider and wider, and after a card like last week where we had a shit ton of minus 500s, it's nice to have a card here where the biggest favorite is like around minus 300, and I think that is Chase Hooper on this card. So biggest favorite, only minus 325. I think very valuable line here, especially as a parlay piece. I think Hooper gets it done. I think that he does find a submission. I think overall, if Hooper gets Alexander Hernandez to the ground, just once or twice, I think that's all he needs to wrap him up. So I'm going to go with Hooper by submission in maybe the second round after, Hernandez kind of gives it his all in the first. And I think it should be fairly simple. I think he is a good parlay piece as well. And let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Jessica Andrade versus Lupita Godinez. And Lupita Godinez, she is very talented. She's coming off that win to Julia Pilastri, who, not a high-level enough opponent to be, proud of that win. And then prior to that, a loss to Mackenzie Dern. Before that, a loss to Verna Jandiroba. And I don't put too much stock in the Verna loss because Verna Jandiroba has been on an absolute tear. I think that, there is a world where Lupi could have been Mackenzie Dern. And then, now she's coming off that win to Julia Pilastri, which, like I said, is a girl that she should definitely beat. She's not fighting Jessica Andrade. And Andrade, I think, a little bit washed. I think that, her main, strength is the fact that she does hit really hard. I think she's going to have the power advantage against Lupita Godinez here. But overall, Lupita, in the boxing, she's going to be better than Andrade. In the wrestling, she's definitely going to be better than Andrade. So I think that she has tons of paths to victory here. Her line is interesting. I think that comes more down to just trust against a Lupita Godinez. I think when she makes a jump in, higher level competition, and, Jessica Andrade might not be the highest level competition, but, she did fight, some pretty decent fighters, had like a title fight before against Valentina Shevchenko. So she's fought the upper class, of the division. So she might not be that in 2025, but she has been there before. And I think that's where a lot of people might see Lupita Godinez kind of struggle. But overall, Lupita Godinez, the better striker, the better wrestler. She just kind of has a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to eating a big shot, when it comes to power. But you're definitely going to pick a Lupita Godinez that kind of has all the options to win. She's also minus, I think, like 140 or something. Yeah, minus 148. So really clean line. I know she's a fighter that's really hard to trust. So I guess that kind of plays into why the line is that way. But I think from a skill set perspective, she has all the tools to get this one done. So I'm going to go with Lupita Godinez. I might even play it. I might it might be too hard to stay away from, even though I know this is a fighter that is not super trustworthy. But, the line seems very, very attractive right now. Next fight on the card, we got Gerald Meerschaert versus Michal Oleksiejczuk. And I'm going to go with Meerschaert right here, bro. I think it's going to be one of those classic GM3 performances where he's getting his ass beat and he subs up his opponent. Now, I just don't think this is too hard to break down. This fight is going to end in a finish. Michal is either getting taken down and subbed in the first time he hits the ground, and probably like within 10 seconds of hitting the ground with GM3, he's probably getting subbed, or, GM3 prior to that takedown is getting knocked the fuck out by Michal. So there's only one or two ways this fight plays out. I think that, GM3 can be chinny, his takedowns are mid, and, Michael will be aggressive, can hit hard, can knock you the hell out. So it's either Michael knocks out GM3, but if he doesn't, I think that GM3 can get him to the ground, and I think if he does get Michal to the ground, I think it only takes him about 10 seconds to sub up Michal here. So I'm going to go GM3. I like the dog money. I think that, GM3 by sub might be something that I end up playing this week. But overall, I mean, it just comes down to that. If GM3 gets knocked out, I'm not going to be surprised. But I do like the value on the fact that all he has to do is get this fight to the ground just once, and I think that that's all he needs to sub up Michal. So I'm going to go GM3 here by submission. I think it happens early. I think this is a first round type of fight, whether it be a knockout or a sub. And, GM3, while he does get hurt, he is chinny. There is some, recoverability aspect. He does kind of just, weasel his way back into the fight. So I'm hoping to see a similar performance this weekend. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Tim Elliott versus Kai Asakura. And I'm going to go with Kai Asakura here. I think he's the second biggest favorite, or, tied for the biggest favorite on this card. It's interesting. Obviously, Kai Asakura got thrown in the deep end in his UFC debut against Alexander Pantoja, who is, potentially or possibly, the best flyweight of all time. I think there is an argument there. And then Tim Elliott, coming off that win to Sumiderji, almost 2 years ago. So big layoff for Tim Elliott. Kai Asakura trying to bounce back, get his first UFC win, and I think he definitely gets it done here. I think this is a very similar situation you see to a Pitbull, where, Pitbull gets thrown in to a pretty decent fight in his UFC debut, isn't able to beat a Yair Rodriguez, but, with that slightly bumped down level of competition, you do see Pitbull do well. And I think that in this same instance, Kai Asakura, Alejandro Pantoja, crazy UFC debut fight. Obviously, Kai Asakura has been fighting MMA for a long time, but I think Tim Elliott is definitely someone that Asakura can beat. Elliott's going to have to get takedowns here. It's very simple. If Elliott doesn't get takedowns, Asakura is going to beat his ass. And I think that, Elliott, while he can wrestle, I just don't see him holding Asakura down. I don't see him having the same impact in the ground game as a Pantoja did. So I'm with Kai Asakura here. I think he can get a late knockout. I think Elliott is tough, but I think Elliott's going to eat a lot of shots. He's going to have only one path to victory. That's going to be very predictable for Kai Asakura. So I think over the course of 3 rounds, you're going to see Elliott, hold a lot of damage. He hasn't been knocked out that many times in his career. He has been knocked out before, though, but only once. But I think that, in this fight against Kai Asakura, you're going to see Elliott be knocked out. But I think maybe late in the fight, second or, even third round. So I'm going with Kai Asakura to win this one by a late knockout. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Gerald Cannonier versus MVP, and I'm going to go with Michael Page to win this one. I think he could knock out Gerald Cannonier. I also think he could potentially win by decision. Now, Michael Venom Page in his, media day interview did say that, he wasn't preparing to stay at middleweight. He was going to go back down to welterweight, and, he hasn't had a camp that he would necessarily have if he was going to stay at middleweight. That wasn't something that he was intending on doing. The fight just ended up, coming about. So that is something to note. It is probably some level of cause for concern, but in general, Gerald Cannonier, tail end of his career, has been badly hurt in his last couple fights. Obviously, he did beat Gregory Rodriguez, but Rodriguez just kind of death-gassed, and in that first round, Rodriguez had him knocked down and almost out of there 2 or 3 times maybe. And then prior to that, the losses to Kaio and Imavov took a shit ton of damage in all of his last 3 fights, Gerald Cannonier. So I think that, Cannonier is going to have one path here. He's not going to be able to take MVP down. He's not going to have anywhere near the speed that MVP has in space. He's going to have to close the distance and kind of hold MVP up against the fence. And, he was doing a pretty good job of that against Imavov a couple fights ago, where he was picking up rounds just by pressing Imavov up against the fence, racking up the standing control time. So MVP, he's going to have to, be urgent, move off the fence. But I think overall, he's not going to be able to take MVP down. I think that MVP will move off the fence and, do a bunch of work in space. So I think it's not even close in space. There's no way a 41-year-old Cannonier is going to be able to track down Michael Venom Page. But, he could just be really aggressive. He could impose his strength and push him up against the fence, especially if an MVP who, was supposed to be going back down to welterweight. So that is something to note. It is a cause for concern, and Cannonier can be physically imposing. So he's going to have one path. He's going to know what it is. MVP is also going to know what it is. And, it's just going to be who can actually go out there and execute. Can MVP execute of moving off the fence and, just kind of doing what it needs to do. Can Cannonier execute of keeping MVP there? We'll see what happens. I like MVP though. I think, he has a better path to victory here, but I can see this kind of getting a little bit shady. So, take that as you will. Up next, we got Geoff Neal versus Carlos Prates, and I'm going with Carlos Prates here. I think by the end of this weekend, his hype train is going to be back. I think he knocks Geoff Neal out in the second round. I think that, Carlos Prates against, Ian Gary. Ian Gary has that, really good movement, really good footwork, pretty dynamic striking. And then he also has, the grappling game to go with it. Geoff Neal, Geoff Neal's a pretty good boxer, but that boxing range is going to be kind of dangerous against Carlos Prates' Muay Thai style. Also, Prates still has the death touch, even against, Ian Gary in that fifth round. He almost had him out of there. Maybe if he did maybe took one less cigarette the day before, he might have gotten Ian Gary out of there. But he still has the death touch. I think that Geoff Neal in that boxing range is going to be way too vulnerable, especially with Prates not really worried about any grappling coming his way, any takedowns coming his way. If he can really settle in, I think that, he's going to take a round. He's going to find his range. His range management is still really good, especially against a style like Geoff Neal's. I think that by the second round, that death touch is coming. So I think Prates knocks out Geoff Neal this weekend. I like the line. I want the hype back for Prates. I think he does get it back. And let's move on to the co-main event. In the co-main event, we got Lerone Murphy versus Aaron Pico, and I'm going with the underdog here. Give me Lerone Murphy. We've seen this story play out multiple times before. This is giving me hella Patchy Mix vibes, and Aaron Pico, I just don't think he's on the level of Lerone Murphy. I think that Lerone Murphy is very, very well rounded. He has great footwork. He's defensively really sound on the feet, and Aaron Pico is pretty much the opposite. He's kind of a brute on the feet. He's gonna come in, eat a couple shots to, throw a big one back. I think that that's not going to work against Lerone Murphy. I think on the feet, Murphy has Pico covered. And then I think that, Pico's going to shoot a lot of takedowns here. I think he should shoot a lot of takedowns here on Murphy. I think Murphy can get a little bit stagnant on the ground. That's something that is a slight hole on his game, and not just on the ground, but just in general with control time. But overall, he has good fight IQ. He knows he needs to reverse position. He knows he can't be controlled for too long or he'll let the round drop. So he is very well aware of that. He's shown that, in the fight, like, for example, the Dan Ige fight, where that third round was pretty close, but Murphy did do, just enough to get that one done. So overall, I think that Pico's going to shoot takedowns. I just don't see him holding Murphy down. I don't see, Murphy not reversing position or kind of getting back into space for too long. And I think that Murphy's going to be able to piece him up. I think he's going to be, defensively way too sound on the feet. So overall, I like Murphy as the underdog. He's got the UFC experience. I think that Pico, Pico's good. And I just think this is one of those things where it's like, I'm done trusting the Bellator fighters. I mean, I didn't really trust them much to begin with. I did fade Patchy Mix against Mario Bautista, and that seemed like a really good call. I think the similar thing kind of plays out here. I got Lerone Murphy. I think he definitely beats Aaron Pico. I think he does it by decision. Let's move on to the main event. The main event, we got Dricus Du Plessis defending his belt against Khamzat Chimaev, and I'm going to go with Khamzat Chimaev here, but I'm going to be honest. I think we all kind of know what the breakdown of this fight looks like. Chimaev, we kind of think that Chimaev needs to get this one done early, but overall, I think that, Chimaev could obviously have the cardio to go 5 rounds here. He did have that fight against Kamaru Usman, which is probably his worst performance so far, and he still 10-8'd Kamaru Usman in the first round. After that, I think he did go and, lose the third round for sure. The second round was hella close. So, that is a pretty close fight overall. I think 2 judges actually scored the second round for Usman, and 2 judges scored the third round for Usman as well. So, in theory, it was just the wrong scoring per judge. But in general, 2 judges had given him both rounds 2 and 3. That is an interesting way to look at that Usman fight, obviously. But Chimaev, that wrestling is an absolute, nightmare offense for anyone he's faced so far, especially early on. And I think that, Du Plessis, I mean, if he does have, the strength that is advertised, if he can, survive early and, drag this into deep waters, he will test Chimaev's cardio. There will be questions that need to be answered about Chimaev's cardio. But overall, I think that, Khamzat Chimaev just feels a little bit inevitable. Since he joined the UFC, he's always been this guy who's supposed to become the champion. And that Dricus Du Plessis obviously has, been really good. He's undefeated in the UFC itself. He does have an interesting style that can clash against Khamzat Chimaev, especially with his durability, especially with his, how unorthodox he is. But overall, I'm going to go ahead and pick Khamzat Chimaev here. I think the line is also fairly attractive to parlay. A lot of people, I think, are going to end up looking either really smart or really dumb. I think that if Chimaev goes out there and just blazes Dricus Du Plessis, then, it's going to look like really simple. And in hindsight, it's going to be like, oh, yeah, what the hell? Chimaev was always the pick. And then if Chimaev just isn't able to get Du Plessis out of there, the fight goes late. And, we see Chimaev struggling with cardio and Du Plessis coming out there and just taking over, then it's also going to be like, oh, yeah, like that was also obvious. So this could go either way. I'm not going to lie. I like Khamzat Chimaev, though. He's going to be my pick. And that does it for the picks and predictions for UFC 319. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you did like what you heard for all the breakdowns of these fights, hit the like button and share the video with your friends. Subscribe to the channel. We do this every single week, and we've been absolutely killing it this year. If you want to check out our actual bets on a week-to-week basis, check out betkopicks.com. For $20 a month, you can see our bets, our unit sizes, when we place them, where we place them, and we do it every single week. We've been up pretty big this year, and overall, it also just helps support the channel. So check that out if that's something you do want to see. It's on betkopicks.com. And outside of that, good luck to everyone on their bets this weekend, and I hope you guys all enjoy UFC 319.